This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Wednesday Twilight Show here on Teachers Talk Radio. I'm your host, Michelle, and tonight I will share my thoughts on the importance of teacher engagement and its impact on pupil outcomes. What if teacher engagement came first? Would education as we know it be transformed for the better? Stay tuned.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Welcome again. For those of you who already joined, thank you so much. And this is the Twilight Show with myself, Michelle, and I am going to be with you tonight. And as was said earlier, please download the Podbean app so that you may join in the conversation. So you could either call in or send me a message, ask a question, or make a comment. I would really appreciate that. So today's title is, what if teacher engagement came first? Leadership that transforms learning. So this is the show where we ask bold questions about what really drives great schools. And every school wants to be great and every school wants to be outstanding. But what drives that? So in this episode, I will dive into what I'm calling the big one. What would happen if every decision in school leadership started with one core principle? And that is engaged teachers first. So much emphasis, as we know, is placed on engaging pupils. But we often forget that if our teachers lack motivation, inspiration, and support, then pupil outcomes will naturally be affected. We know that a lackluster teacher who has lost their passion cannot be effective. So why don't we address it? And not just address it, but do something about it, something practical and strategic and tangible. And that's what I'd like to explore tonight. What are those barriers that might be preventing leaders from really taking on board the need for teacher engagement? We know that teachers who feel energized, trusted, and valued create classrooms where students thrive. So today's discussion isn't just about leadership, but it's about culture, agency, well-being, and purpose. So remember to download the Podbean app so you could call in, share your own experiences, your own thoughts, even just make a comment or ask a question. And before I proceed, if my voice is sounding a little bit croaky, my apologies. Today was sports day. And of course, I embodied true house spirit today, cheering on my house, which started at the top in the morning and ended up at the bottom by the afternoon. Nonetheless, I gave it my all by supporting through cheering and encouraging my house to do their very best. So apologies for that if I'm a little bit croaky. So we're going to go right into the discussion. And as usual, I always like to talk about the research. And I must say that this topic tonight was inspired by the findings I've made so far from my dissertation and my literature review. And I'm looking at the impact of leadership on school effectiveness. And repeatedly, I see where teacher engagement is being shown as one of those factors that really drive student outcomes. But not much work is being done around teacher engagement and how we keep our teachers actively involved in school decisions, actively involved in the school's vision, and in ensuring that the school's vision is realized. So according to research, teacher engagement strongly predicts student engagement and achievement. And that goes without saying. We know this. It also said that leadership behavior is the number one driver of teacher engagement. So the question is, why don't we give this enough of our attention, or why isn't it prioritized? One research from the self-determination theory says autonomy, trust, and professional voice increase motivation. And according to the OECD tallies, high quality CPD boosts engagement. And we know that if the CPDs are relevant, suited to the needs of the teachers, then clearly engagement will increase. But what we have sometimes, we have more compliance based training. And what that does, it reduces engagement. Some of the literature review also suggests that recognition fuels retention, and engaged teachers stay in schools usually. Disengaged teachers tend to leave. So, if we know all these things, then what is preventing leaders? What is preventing those who are involved in developing our teachers? What is preventing them from prioritizing teacher engagement? And to sum up the research, teacher engagement is the strongest predictor of student engagement. Student engagement is the strongest predictor of achievement. So I'm going to explore these things by looking at certain questions that are posed around teacher engagement, and I'll do my best to respond to those questions and have that discussion. Once again, please download the Podbean app so that you may participate actively in tonight's conversation. I'm going to take a short break. Do stay tuned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
Thank you so much for staying with us tonight. And as I said before the break, we were talking about teacher engagement, and I'll continue to have that discussion tonight. Do participate if you can. So when I hear the phrase teacher engagement, what does it mean to me personally and professionally? And for me, teacher engagement is the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral commitment that teachers bring to their role, usually driven by purpose, autonomy, and support. So for teachers to be fully committed, then there has to be a sense of autonomy. And I will explore that throughout the show, but giving teachers the agency, the autonomy to develop their skill set, their subject area, to lead and to manage according to the needs of their students without too much micromanagement, that will definitely encourage teacher engagement. So for me, that is also being a part of the school's culture. Feeling belonged, a show I had recently, we explored that. Engaging actively in decision making, and I think the operative word there is actively, and not having this illusion of choice. And being given the platform to develop both personally and professionally. So if I were to reflect on a moment in my career when I felt deeply engaged as a teacher, and when I was reflecting, I cast my mind back many years ago when I taught in a school in Southeast London. And I just felt like I was being promoted almost every term. Now, that's an exaggeration, but at the time, that's how it felt. And the reason for that was because my skill set and competence were recognized and tapped into. And I recall the head would call me into his office and go, right, Michelle, we need this particular role filled, something internal. We think you'd be the best person for it, to drive this forward, to develop this, and so on. And for me, when I feel engaged is when I'm most challenged, when my passion for my subject area or leadership role is recognized and honed. And so at that point in my career, I really felt driven. I felt like I was a part of the school's culture. I felt belonged, and I felt as though I was listened to and I was a part of the decision-making process. And to an extent, I still feel that way today in my current context, where I'm being given the autonomy to make decisions that I believe are suited to the needs of my students, suited to the needs of the department, and of course, aligned with the school's vision. So think about it. Do you feel engaged in your current school setting? And maybe it's time to reflect on that. Do you feel engaged? Do you feel like you belong there? Do you feel like you have some sense of ownership of the school's vision? And if the answer is no, perhaps it's time to move on, or maybe have a conversation with your line manager and just see where you could find your place in that particular school and how else you can be engaged in the school's culture. So, why is teacher engagement often discussed but not prioritized? And I mentioned this earlier. And several reasons have been put forward. And one of them is that because many school leaders focus heavily on short term quantifiable outcomes, such as pupil achievement data. And we know that a lot of our schools, and especially when it comes to the exam groups, they are so data driven. And it's all about the output. What have the students accomplished? What will they accomplish? And what do we need to do now in the short term to make sure that happens? We know that sometimes it's because it's driven by inspection results and performance metrics. So when leadership is driven primarily by accountability pressures, the emphasis shifts towards managing outputs rather than investing in the conditions that produce those outputs. And I think that is so key and something that we really need to reflect on as leaders. Are we simply managing the outputs in the short term rather than investing in the conditions that produce these outputs? So, in other words, are we investing in our teachers so that the outputs and the positive outputs and the great outcomes will be more consistent? And as I was putting my notes together, I was trying to think of an analogy where we focus on the output rather than the conditions that produce those. And I could only think of a time when I owned what we call a banger, an old car. And I bought that car because I had to prioritize some other dreams and aspirations I had at the time. And I'm telling you, this car was very old. But I thought, yeah, it will do the job. It will take me to and from work. So that's okay. But then I noticed that the car started to leak. I did not take it to the mechanic. I refused. I thought, oh, it's an old car. It's okay. It will tide me over. But ever so often, I had to either pull over to fill it up with water, or before I headed out for work in the morning, I would have to fill up before I left for work, the same. So I always had a bottle of water in the car. And at one point, the security guards and the site managers, they started to call me Miss Mechanic because they would see me under the hood filling up every afternoon. So I wasn't addressing the problem by getting the leak fixed, but I kept pouring into it because for the short term, that car took me to and from work. And it's the same thing with our teachers. And it's the same thing that impacts on the lack of engagement. We're focusing on the data, the results, but we're forgetting the people and the driving force behind those results. In some cases as well, leaders may not adopt a transformational or transactional approach, or it's not balanced, or they may lack an understanding of the bigger picture, as I said before. So they recognize the importance of engaged teachers in theory, but they underestimate the long-term impact that engagement has on motivation, retention, and ultimately student success. Happy teachers create students who thrive because you love what you do, you feel valued, you feel listened to and heard, so your students will in turn thrive. But what happens is that teacher engagement becomes talked about rather than actioned. And I will share some strategies later on. But prioritizing teacher engagement requires a strategic mindset, recognizing that high levels of staff motivation, professional autonomy, and meaningful recognition directly influence the quality of teaching and learning. So when leaders intentionally cultivate a positive professional culture where teachers feel valued, supported, and trusted, we know that pupil outcomes improve as a natural consequence. And I think for me, the operative word there is intentionally. It has to be intentional. So in other words, teacher engagement is not nice to have. It is a key determinant of sustained school improvement. And so, as I've been doing my research, more and more I see teacher engagement coming up in school effectiveness because we talk about student outcomes as the number one factor of school effectiveness. But actually, teacher engagement is of the same importance because without it, then we will not have the effective outcomes we're expecting. And as I said before, research consistently shows that it's a misconception to think that teacher engagement should probably come after student engagement. And Gallup 2023 reports that engaged teachers are 2.5 times more likely to feel confident about improving student outcomes. Yet globally, only 30% of teachers report being engaged at work. There are teachers walking around who are bored. They have no challenge, or maybe they're not bored, but they have no time to really enjoy what they do because it's all about compliance and they're being told what to do. And I know it's a big challenge for leaders. How do you create that balance between compliance and engagement? And hopefully at some point I'll be able to share some ideas. So let me pause again to welcome those of you who've joined. Verona, thank you so much for keeping me company. And whoever else is online, wherever you're listening from, thank you so much. So I'm talking about teacher engagement tonight. And I was just looking at some of the research around this misconception that it is not as important as other aspects of school effectiveness. And Hargreaves and Fullen, 2012, emphasized that teacher motivation and professional capital are key drivers of school improvement. Without them, they argue, reforms fail or become compliance focused. So we can have all these reforms and we can have all these policies, but if our teachers are not motivated and they're not driven and they're not being seen as a part of the school improvement plan, actively as a part of the school improvement plan, then all these reforms and all these policies will naturally fail. And we're constantly revisiting them or trying to improve them without fixing. And to be honest, that's one word I think we should not use anymore, fixing teacher engagement. It's not something to be fixed. And I'll explore that later on as well. But it's making sure that from the very beginning that teachers are so involved in everything regarding the school culture that it's not something to be fixed. Howdy, Tom. Thank you so much for joining as well. Lovely to see that you're here as well. So Leithwood et al. 2020 state that leadership behaviors account for nearly 25% of the variation in teacher motivation, making leadership the second greatest school-based factor influencing student achievement, and that is after classroom teaching itself. So as leaders, it doesn't matter if you're leading as the middle leader or you are the senior leader, it is very evident that leadership plays such an integral role in teacher engagement and influencing student achievement. So it's important that as leaders, we really reflect on our leadership styles and think, are we being transformative? Are we inspiring? Are we leading by example? Are we giving our teachers autonomy to develop, to grow? Or are we inhibiting their progress? Are we creating a generation of disenfranchised teachers, disillusioned teachers who come into the profession and then leave in no time? I did a show on that as well. How long are teachers staying? Why are they leaving? Maybe it's because they're disengaged. So as leaders, it's important for us to be a little bit more reflective on that. So of course, for all of this to happen, the culture of the school, the culture of education, there needs to be a shift where we do not have teacher engagement. So how can school leaders shift from a compliance-based culture to a culture of engagement? And this is possible if the culture of engagement is done so intentionally by moving from control to connection. So compliance focuses, as I said before, on policies, procedures, and accountability. And mind you, we need those. So I'm not saying abandon these things. We need policies. We need procedures. We need to ensure that everybody has a sense of accountability. But the question is, how do we do it? And unfortunately, too often, these are achieved through monitoring and sometimes coercion. And I've heard teachers talk about feeling bullied and being forced to do things that they think are not the right things or the right decisions to be made at the time, but they're being forced to do it. And then if we coerce our teachers and if we just lead through compliance, then of course we're not going to have teachers who are engaged. So while engagement, of course, so compliance is there and we do it because we want things to be done and we want there to be some accountability and we want the output. But engagement, on the other hand, is built on trust, professional respect, and shared purpose. And I like that particular point, professional respect. The point is, you've employed these teachers, we've employed these teachers because we trust their capabilities. And during that process, we consider them to be competent in their skill set and what they can bring to the school. So where down the line do we then begin to lose that professional respect? Where down the line do we begin to question whether or not these teachers are competent enough? And mind you, of course, there are teachers who join the profession, join the school, join the department, and then you realize they're probably not the best fit. But what do we do in that situation? And that is what I'll talk about when we talk about some strategies. So it's not about coercing them, of course, and it's about providing the right level of training and coaching and mentoring that will ensure that these teachers develop. And sometimes if people are not the right fit, then, they will be able to be, hopefully, reflective and know that probably that particular environment is not for them. But for me, the starting point in ensuring engagement is knowing your teachers deeply, understanding their strengths, areas for development, their professional interests, and individual aspirations. So think about it. As a leader, when was the last time you sat down with a member of your team and asked them, what are your aspirations? What are your professional goals and interests? What are your individual dreams and goals? When was the last time you've done that? And it's important to do that because then you could actually support them to achieve those goals. And if they feel as though you are supporting them to develop their professional capacity, then you get so much more out of your teachers because they feel as though you're investing in them, you're spending the time and the resources to make sure that they're the best that they could possibly be. So it's important that we invest in our teachers, that we find out their interests. And so once you do that, as I said before, you can tailor support, offer meaningful development opportunities, and connect the school's goals to the teacher's intrinsic motivation. And so, we don't want to crush our teachers' spirits. And if a teacher is ambitious and they really want to maybe aspire to become leaders themselves or to take on a particular project, it is so important for us as leaders to listen to what they have to say and maybe help them develop those areas as well. And if it aligns with the school's improvement plan, then you give them the fullest support. But let us try not to crush the ambitions of our teachers and label them as overly ambitious, but rather look at that into something more positive and just see how we could tap into those ambitions for the good of the school and for ultimately student outcomes. It's also important that leaders create a culture where professional learning is embedded in everyday practice. And I think my current school has nailed that to an extent, not seeing it as a one-off event or a box ticking exercise. And so, as I said before, this should include things like providing autonomy and involving teachers in decision making. And today I asked some teachers, do you feel as though you're involved in the decision making process? And these were some middle leaders. And one of them said, it depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the school. It depends on your managers. Another one said, sometimes you're made to feel as though you're part of the decision-making process, but you know that the decision has already been made. And so it's important for leaders that we do take into account other people's suggestion. And so people will feel valued. We need to offer coaching, mentorship, and collaborative planning time. And when I talk about coaching and mentorship, the people that are assigned to do the coaching and the mentoring, they also should be trained, and there should be time spent and resources handed over to these people so that they have the skills to do it and to do it properly. Because sometimes you find that uh, schools offer coaching and mentorship, but the people who are doing it, unfortunately, they don't have the skills, they don't have the knowledge in order to do it effectively. And so it falls by the wayside. It's no longer effective. The teacher who's being coached is not really making any progress, and the coach themselves really don't know where to go with it. So whatever we do, it has to be intentional. Also, collaborative planning time. And you ask teachers around the globe, across the globe, they will tell you there's not enough time for collaboration and for planning together. And those things can definitely be built into the school's calendar. We want to ensure that CPDs align with the teacher's goals and the school's strategic priorities as well. And often you find that CPDs are just one off tick box exercises. Okay, let's gather everybody and let's spend 2 hours in the afternoon talking about, let's say, for example, adaptive teaching. And 2 weeks later, or the next CPD, we go on again about adaptive teaching. But we're only passing on the theory and nothing is being implemented and nothing is being given time to be embedded. And before we even get our heads around it, the next CPD, we move on to something else. Another thing I sometimes find frustrating with CPDs as well is that everybody is expected to participate in the same CPD despite where you're at in your career. And what I'm saying, I mean, learning is ongoing, and I don't have a problem with that. I'm all about continued professional development. But so you need to know your staff to know who needs what. And sometimes we have to gather as a whole school, but there are times when CPDs can be tailored to the needs of individual teachers, and you put people together and you have CPDs for that particular area of development, and you have CPDs for another area of development, and everybody's off into their own little carousel doing the CPDs tailored to their needs. And I think schools need to do that a little bit more. And according to Daniel Pink, 2009, he highlights that autonomy, mastery, and purpose are the greatest motivators of human behavior. We love to feel like we have some sense of ownership and that we are masters, or we've mastered the things that we're working on, or a subject area, for example. But we need time to do that. And he also believes that it's far more powerful than compliance or external pressure, because compliance and external pressures, they result in burnout. And so it's so important that we get the balance right. Now, for anybody who's in the world of research, we all know about Leithwood. And Leithwood states that leadership that empowers teachers improves engagement and commitment, whereas compliance-based accountability, as I said before, increases stress and reduces innovation. And we talk about innovation, and we want our teachers to innovate, and we want them, to come up with these brilliant ideas and to execute them. But do we provide the platform for them to do this? Do we make sure that they have all that they need to do this? Do we give them the space to do it? So these are things we really need to think about as leaders. So ultimately, compliance culture says, do this because we said so. And how many times do we say that to our students? If we ask a student to change their seat, for example, they will ask, why, miss, or why, sir? And what do we say? Because I said so. So we do it. But we want to shift away from that when it comes to staff. So an engagement culture, however, says, let's do this together because it matters. And it's articulating that to the staff body and getting the buy-in as well. So to build engagement, leaders need to ensure that we do this through trust, so reducing micromanagement, and assume professionalism. And even myself, I have to make a conscious effort that I'm not micromanaging the team, and making sure that if I make a suggestion, that we have the chance to discuss it, and that people will voluntarily go ahead and take ownership of aspects of it, so that together this, whatever idea it is, can be developed. And sometimes you really have to restrain yourself from stepping in to take over, or uh, maybe you ask somebody to lead on something and then suddenly you're at the forefront taking charge. And then in situations like those, it's important that you empower your teachers to be able to do that. Meet with them, discuss whatever areas they think they need to develop, and then guide them accordingly rather than micromanaging and being involved in every little thing. So, for example, I've got a Key Stage 3 lead and I've got a Key Stage 5 lead. And so we meet fortnightly and we discuss the areas that we need to develop. We discuss what's going well. And I really I do try the autonomy to them to develop their area, the areas that they're responsible for. And that's something as leaders we really do need to make a conscious effort to do. We must assume professionalism. We need to give people choice, offer meaningful autonomy in teaching methods, or CPD. Now, I think it was my last show, we talked about having these rigid structures for teaching and learning, and you must start like this, you must develop like this, and you must conclude the lesson like this. And whilst we need to have a framework, especially for ECTs, I think as our teachers become more experienced and develop their own style of teaching, we should give them the autonomy to do that, because ultimately we're talking about outcomes or student outcomes. And so we should have that flexibility of choice where teachers can use their own methods and style that they have found effective to develop their teaching and learning. And of course, offering meaningful CPDs as well and the autonomy to choose. So let me pause here again and say welcome everyone who's joined us online. We've got Arjun. Hello. Thank you so much for joining. Please remember to download the Podbean app so that you can call in or send me a message or make a comment. Share with me your own thoughts, your own experiences with teacher engagement. Do you feel engaged in your current setting? If so, why? How? What does it look like? So I was just talking about how leaders can build engagement, and I said trust, choice, and the other one is voice. Okay, we need to ask for feedback and act on it, and also giving teachers recognition, acknowledge their effort, and celebrate growth, not just outcomes. Celebrate those milestones, those small wins. Celebrate them. So compliance produces obedience. Engagement produces ownership. When teachers feel trusted, supported, and part of a shared mission, they naturally bring more energy, creativity, and commitment to the classroom. And of course, student outcomes improve as a result. I'm going to take another short break while we think about all these things I've shared tonight. So for those of you who are just joining, tonight we're talking about making teacher engagement a priority. We often talk about student engagement, but we're forgetting that if our teachers are not engaged, not motivated, not empowered, it's sometimes difficult for them to be creative, for them to feel driven, and then that will ultimately impact on student outcomes. So do stay with us. I'm going for a very short break.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
And I think that ties in well with tonight's show about engagement. And sometimes teachers, we just have to go out there and attend these workshops and conferences and reignite the passion and the spark that we had when we first decided to teach. So prior to the break, we were just talking about how to develop that culture of engagement and rather than compliance. And for this segment, I'm just going to explore briefly what leadership behaviors have the biggest impact on teacher motivation and engagement. because as I said before, that leadership is it is the number one driving factor in teacher engagement. So I'm going to talk about the behaviors that impact on teacher motivation and engagement. And for those of you who are just joining as well, pardon the croaky voice. I was explaining earlier that I was cheering on my house today, and I'm very competitive. So clearly I got carried away a little bit, but so do bear with me. So leadership behaviors, as we know, have a powerful influence on teacher motivation and engagement. I mean, it goes without saying. Teachers don't simply engage because they love teaching. Well, I love teaching, but we engage because the conditions created by leadership allow them to thrive. And I think the foundation is, we love our jobs. I love being in the classroom. I love engaging my learners. I love interacting with staff. But we also need the conditions created by leadership to allow us to thrive, to be successful. The behaviors that matter most include the following. So I'm just going to explore a few of these things. And some of them I've said earlier. Number one, prioritizing meaningful professional development. So leaders who invest in purposeful, ongoing CPD show teachers that growth is valued. So when professional development is aligned to individual goals and strengths, as I said briefly earlier, not just whole school initiatives, teachers feel empowered and more confident in the classroom. And we've got Hargreaves and Fullen who argue that when leaders build professional capital, teachers increase commitment, efficacy, and willingness to innovate. And in order for us to really advance in education, and to get the most out of our students and to get them to achieve the highest possible outcome, we really do need to pause here. Leaders, if you're listening, we really need to pause and think about how much are we investing in professional development? How much time do we spend to ensure that it's meaningful? As I've said before, it's also important for leaders to demonstrate trust and grant autonomy. And trust is one of the strongest predictors of teacher engagement. Therefore, leaders who avoid micromanaging and instead allow professional autonomy signal confidence in teacher expertise. And when teachers see that you have that confidence in their expertise, surely there will be that motivation, that drive to ensure that they meet the demands and the needs of the school, but in an environment that is conducive to their own development and their sense of purpose and fulfillment. So when teachers have voice, when they have a choice, when there is flexibility, undoubtedly engagement increases. Now, I did a show on the next idea I'm going to raise, and it's about authenticity. So in order for there to be any impact at all in teacher motivation, we need to lead with authenticity and emotional intelligence. Without the teacher saying it, we should be able to recognize that they're lacking motivation, or we should be able to recognize that we need to do a little bit more to, ignite this passion in this particular teacher. Authentic leaders are therefore transparent, consistent, and open about challenges and decisions. And that is not easy. So I did a whole show on authentic leadership. You have to be open with staff. You have to let them know why you've made a particular decision or why you've had to make this decision. You have to make them know of the challenges that, we're facing as a school, as a department, so that they can come together and share the vision and come up with solutions as well. And authentic leaders also have to be consistent. We have to be consistent in our efforts. We have to be consistent in our expectations. And we have to be consistent in the way we value our teachers. We also have to be open about the challenges, as I said before, and the decisions. And sometimes you have to make an executive decision. But even so, be open with it. Make sure that your staff understand exactly where you're coming from. You need to connect on a human level. And here is the area of concern for me. Sometimes, as people move up the ranks of leadership and they get into senior leadership, I sometimes wonder if they forget what it was like as a classroom teacher. And they forget the challenges and the demands in the classroom and managing different personalities and planning different lessons and different specifications. And so we kind of disconnect at that human level. And all we're seeing is the end product. We need 90% grade 6 and above. We need 85% in maths, English, and science. All students must get 4 plus. And then we forget the human beings behind it, the driving force behind it, our very own teachers. And so we pressure them so much that we have burnout and we have really talented teachers who leave the profession prematurely. These are things we need to think about, and we need to do whatever it takes to prevent this from happening so frequently. I'm sure you all know of Brené Brown. She noted that vulnerability and authenticity strengthen relationships and build psychological safety. So the key to engagement and innovation is strengthening those relationships through authenticity, creating a supportive and a non-judgmental environment. How many times have we done, for example, learning walks? And do we do it to develop our teachers? Or do we do it because we want to catch them out, or because we want to decide whether or not this person is suitable, for our environment? Are we doing it in a judgmental way, or is it to develop our colleagues? And these are some of the things we need to think about, making sure that when we conduct these learning walks, or, when we have these meetings, that we're doing them to engage and to help our teachers to become better, but not in a judgmental way, or to, overly critical. Because what this does is it creates a climate of fear, leading teachers to focus on compliance rather than creativity. And that is the thing. I mean, if you have teachers who are in a classroom who are fearful and they're worried about the next person who's going to walk into the room and pop into the room, and that anxiety, it impacts on our students as well, because they will sense it. And so it's important that we develop a culture of autonomy and professionalism, so that when our teachers don't feel fearful when they're in the classroom. And therefore, we have a group of compliant teachers rather than a group of creative teachers who step outside the box and the boundaries and develop innovative methods and strategies for teaching and learning. So rather than that, what we need are leaders who give constructive feedback, who focus on growth, not fault finding. And this will therefore reduce anxiety and increase teacher resilience. So it is important for leaders to prioritize meaningful CPDs, demonstrate trust, granting autonomy, lead with authenticity and emotional intelligence, and create a supportive, non-judgmental environment. All things that are doable. And if you don't know where to begin, then as a leader, you probably need some training, and there's nothing wrong with that. So welcome again, everyone. Thank you for staying with me tonight. I appreciate that. I would love to hear your thoughts as well on teacher engagement. What have you experienced? Do you feel engaged in your setting? Or do you feel as though you're not being engaged enough? What does that look like? How does that feel? Or you can ask a question. I'll do my best to answer it. Another thing as well is avoiding autocratic or micromanaging leadership styles. I mentioned that briefly. But autocratic leaders who demand compliance without collaboration often diminish teacher initiative, and then that impacts on staff morale. And so if you're constantly dictating to teachers, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is how you should do it, this is when you should do it, then you're wearing teachers out. But as I said before, we have the school's vision. You share that. We have the school's improvement plan. We have the department improvement plan. Make sure your teachers are familiar with that, but also give them the autonomy to be able to be a part of that vision and to come with their own ideas and suggestions. And of course, in leadership, we need guidance. And of course, we need principles and policies to guide us to accomplish certain things. But at the same time, we also need to give teachers the space and the autonomy to do that. And you will hear me throughout the evening and throughout the show referring to research, as I said before. This show is as a result of the findings from my current dissertation, where I'm looking at the impact of leadership on school effectiveness. So, hence my constant reference to research. So, Leithwood found that leadership influences 25% of the variation in teacher motivation. Micromanagement signals a lack of trust. I'm not going to let go the reins here. I will let you feel as though you're leading on this, but actually I'm the one who's doing it. It reduces ownership, leads to disengagement, and as I said earlier, burnout. In contrast, however, transformational leaders inspire a shared purpose. You are involved in the process, but at the same time, you're empowering your staff to take the lead. And especially when you know their strengths, you build on that and really help them to develop as individuals and as professionals. Communicate a clear vision. You must articulate the vision. Your staff, teachers, they need to understand the vision. It cannot be woolly, it has to be clear. You must build strong relationships. And in order to do that, you've got to know your staff, meet with them, catch up with them informally, formally, know your teachers, know what's happening in their lives, celebrate their successes as well. You know that a member of staff will be speaking at a conference. Celebrate that, motivate, encourage, big them up, as we would say. Let the school know, encourage the staff to go and support and so on. Celebrate that. You know that somebody has obtained a degree in something or a certificate in something, or it doesn't even have to be academic. It could be something outside of school, extracurricular. Celebrate that. Build relationships. Find out more about your teachers. Find out about the teacher who loves bungee jumping. Find out about the teacher whose last holiday was such an adventure where they went globetrotting and they discovered so many new things about different cultures. Celebrate those things. We have to take our heads out of the cloud and sometimes we have to look up from the data sheets and really get to know the people behind it. Know your staff. And those things will make someone's day. Imagine walking down the corridor and you see your a member of staff walking in the opposite direction, coming towards you, and you're able to greet them and maybe just say quickly, "Oh, by the way, how is your new tennis coaching going?" Or something else. How is the knitting going, for example? But show the teachers that you're invested in them, not just professionally, but personally as well. And then you want to empower your teachers to lead change. And that is when you become transformational. You empower them to lead change, to want to be a part of the change that you're trying to, in effect, create in your school as well. But you want teachers to feel as though they're a part of that. Put them in the driving seat sometimes based on, as I said before, their skill set, and hand over the reins and let them thrive and grow and flourish. And then in essence, student outcome will increase. You'll have a happy environment, a school where teachers look forward to come to every day and not have the Sunday night blues. Ideally, we're speaking ideally here, but it is doable and it is possible, and it starts with leadership. So all of these behaviors create a culture where teachers feel valued, supported, and trusted. And I've said this repeatedly. And what that does, it strengthens their motivation, their commitment, and ultimately their performance. So leadership doesn't just influence engagement, it determines it. And that's what we really need to think about. It doesn't just influence engagement, it determines it. It's the leaders who set the tone. It's the leaders who establish that culture of engagement rather than one of compliance. So, do teachers naturally engage learners when they are engaged? Most definitely. They will be intrinsically motivated to develop themselves. They'll be enthusiastic in their classes and pedagogy, and that passion will be transmitted to their students. When I'm teaching, whether it's Shakespeare or poetry or creative writing, I would want to think that my students have spotted and seen the passion that I bring to it. But then if teachers are burnt out and they just want to finish the curriculum and they've got to get through 20 poems and they have no time, to bring in all the excitement and the games and everything that will engage learners because they're burnt out and they have so many other external pressures, then we're not going to get the outcome. So it's important that we really give our teachers the chance to develop their subject that they were trained to teach, okay, and share this passion with our students. So I'm going to break for the news. And when we come back, we want to think about that one thing. And it was difficult for me to narrow this down to one thing that a leader can do to stop the barriers or to remove the barriers to engagement. So if you want to share as well, when we come back, the question is, what's one thing a leader can stop doing today that would immediately remove barriers to engagement? So joining Joe Fox for the news, do stay tuned.
This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles.
Teachers, have you heard of Bet UK 2026? It's the world's biggest education and technology event, and it's completely free for educators. From keynote speakers and panel sessions to CPD accredited workshops and networking, Bet UK 2026 is where educators from across the globe come together to share ideas, spark inspiration, and find solutions that fuel our mission to drive better education globally. Get your free ticket today at betshow.com.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
BBC Scotland reports that an East Dunbartonshire secondary school with more than 1,300 pupils has been found to pose a substantial risk to life from fire, according to a fire safety report. The report says that the school, named by the BBC as Lenzie Academy, had fire exits that were not easily accessible nor immediately openable, fire doors were not always closed, and were not in good condition. The EIS Teaching Union described conditions in the school as dangerous and said its members have voted to initiate an indicative ballot for industrial action. The report also found there was not suitable protection of escape routes, not all cooking appliances were maintained and in a good condition, and combustible materials were not always separated from ignition sources. 25 recommendations were made in total, but the council chief executive for the area said the school remains safe for pupils, teachers and staff to occupy, and the issues listed as immediate threat to life had already been addressed. Full details, including calls by parents for the school to be rebuilt, can be found on the BBC News Scotland website. Schools Week reports that Ofsted has tweaked its inspection framework to tackle concerns raised during pilot inspections, just days before its new report cards are due to be rolled out. Findings from 115 pilot inspections have been published, and in the narrative summary, the watchdog says feedback has been really encouraging, but says some leaders did raise concerns. These issues included increased workload and pressure on staff, particularly in smaller schools, and worries about how achievement is evaluated. The changes include modifications to the size of inspection teams at smaller schools and tweaks to the inspection toolkits. Some leaders feared that schools would be tempted to be less inclusive so they could score more highly on achievement. Ofsted has added the word typically to one of its expected standards for achievement, which may be an attempt to address this. The toolkit now reads, on the whole, pupils achieve well. Typically, this will be reflected in their attainment and progress in national tests and examinations, which are broadly in line with national averages, including for disadvantaged pupils. Full details on the tweaks can be found in Schools Week. The Francis Review has been covered by a range of media outlets, including TES, Schools Week, and many mainstream news sites. However, One article in Schools Week has focused on ministers' acceptance of one of the review's key calls: to bring religious education into the national curriculum. Professor Francis's review has called for government to set up a task force to develop a national curriculum for RE, but ministers have said the sector must reach consensus on whether this is achievable. Currently, all state schools must teach pupils the subject up to the age of 18, but the syllabus is determined at local authority level. The sector is to be invited to form a task and finish group led by Dr. Vanessa Ogden, CEO of the Mulberry Schools Trust, and panellists on the Francis Review. More details and comment from teachers, leaders and Humanists UK can be found on Schools Week. Just as the Curriculum and Assessment Review considers the role the arts play in the economy and how engagement with these subjects can be promoted, the BBC reports that all music courses are being suspended for new students at the University of Nottingham. In an announcement in the last week, the institution said it was also suspending modern language courses and proposed to reduce its nursing offer. Students currently on courses will be supported to complete their studies. The University and College Union said it is opposing the cuts. Full details of the announcement can be found online. Finally, a new university specialising in dentistry is one of the projects being considered as part of the redevelopment of Weymouth, according to local news outlets. The plans for the university are being developed in partnership with Health Sciences University and local NHS partners. More details online. This has been Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome back, everyone. Thanks for staying tuned and for joining us tonight. Remember to download the Podbean app so that you can share your comment or ask a question or just tell us what do you think about teacher engagement and how important it is. Somebody's asking, is it only one-way communication? So I don't know if that's a question about engagement, if it's one-way communication, but I think if it's related to that, then I don't think so. I think engagement involves all parties, teachers, leaders, and students. It's collaborative, I think, in order for engagement to be successful. So prior to the break, I asked, what's one thing a leader can stop doing today that would immediately remove barriers to engagement? And based on the discussion so far I'm talking a lot about the impact of a lack of teacher engagement. And I will definitely be sharing some strategies in the last section of the show. But based on everything I've been talking about, I think that one thing that leaders could stop doing today that would immediately remove barriers to engagement is stop micromanaging. And as I said before, micromanagement signals a lack of trust and it limits autonomy. And then what it does is it turns highly capable professionals into task followers instead of decision makers. And it shifts the culture from ownership, as I said before, to obedience and compliance. And nothing disengages a motivated teacher faster than feeling controlled or monitored rather than valued. It becomes, okay, I need to do this, but then there is no heart in what is being done. So when leaders stop micromanaging, this happens almost immediately, okay? And you can tell me what you think, but these are the things I thought about. One, teachers feel more trusted. Creativity and innovation increase. Pressure and anxiety decrease. Engagement and ownership rise. And this is backed by research. Pink 2009 states autonomy is one of the biggest drivers of intrinsic motivation. And I mentioned that earlier as well. Leithwood said that leadership behaviors that increase autonomy have a direct positive effect on teacher commitment, motivation, and well-being. We need to trust the professionals that we have in front of us. We need to trust the people who've been trained to do the job and just make sure that we provide the professional development that they need to continue to improve. So instead of micromanaging, as leaders, we need to shift to trust and support. Give clarity on the goal, then give freedom in the process and offer help when needed. And I think that's such a great way to sum that up. Clarity, freedom, and help when needed. So, removing micromanagement removes the biggest barrier to engagement, in my opinion, the feeling of not being trusted. So, I think if leaders could really try that and not think, oh, I need to be involved in this, I must do this. Just remember, give clarity on the goal, give freedom in the process, and offer help when needed. Don't just jump in immediately when things are falling apart. No, allow your teachers to recognize that they can learn from their mistakes and that it's okay to make these mistakes as long as we find the solutions to move forward and to improve our practice. So, I've talked a lot about the impact of a lack of teacher engagement. So, what are some practical strategies and how can we combat this lack of motivation? But the question really is, if a leader has limited time and resources, what is the simplest strategy they can implement to support teacher engagement? Because we always hear there's not enough time and we don't have enough resources. But even when time and resources are limited, leaders can significantly boost teacher engagement. And they can do this by focusing on how they work with staff, not how much they can provide. So, the simplest strategy, in my opinion, is to share leadership rather than shoulder leadership. You share it and delegate with purpose. So, instead of assigning tasks, delegate ownership. Identify the teacher's strengths and passions and give them responsibility in those areas, whether leading part of a project, running a club, or trialing a new teaching strategy. But you identify those strengths and then you help them to develop those areas. Um, so when teachers own part of the school's improvement journey, we know that they're more invested and more motivated. For example, with clubs and societies, give the teachers the autonomy to decide on the ones that they would like to lead and the ones that they would like to be a part of, and then they will be motivated to do it. Now, today, for instance, I was asked to support the area of Sports Day on shot put. I was asked to go and support with shot put. Now, for those of you who know me, I love sports. I love athletics. I love competitive sports, to be honest. But I am not athletic myself, mind you. But I love it. I love to watch it. I love to cheer people on when they're participating. But I don't really get involved. And so when I discovered that I was going to be managing the shot put area, to begin with, I was a little bit, oh no, shot put, what am I going to be doing there? Oh boy. And so initially there was no motivation. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in the heat all day, picking up these shot put and putting pegs in holes and doing all sorts. And all I could think about was how tedious it would be. But I really had to dig deep. And to be honest, once I got started, I enjoyed it. But when it comes to professional development, it is so important that we recognize and understand the passion, our teachers' passions, and we tap into that rather than imposing things onto them, saying, this is what you must do. Now, mind you, there are things that we have to do and we must do. It's part of the expectations and requirements in education. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it's laissez-faire. Absolutely not. Now, here you go, do what you want. But I often say this to colleagues and friends and family, that for me, I think within structure, then we can have creativity, because if we know what we're working with and if we have that end goal, then clearly within that, we have the freedom and autonomy to be creative. So it's important to delegate with purpose, as I said. So when teachers own part of the school's improvement journey, they are more invested and motivated. Delegation communicates trust and respect for teacher expertise. And it does boost them. They feel, okay, so-and-so trusts me to do this because they recognize I'm capable. Another strategy is to be transparent and communicate openly. So when leaders are honest about limitations, for example, time, budget, staffing, teachers feel included rather than dictated to. So transparency replaces uncertainty with clarity and eliminates the feeling of decisions being done to us. So when staff understand the why, they're far more willing to invest in the how. Why are we doing this? So it doesn't have to be hush hush and clandestine. We're doing this because we've had to cut the English or the history budget because, and you let people see the bigger picture, why you had to do it. And 9 out of 10 times, or maybe 100% of the time, actually, teachers will understand. We had to take off a percent of the budget because of these reasons. But that is going into another area that is going to help the school as a whole and, of course, ultimately help our students. So far, the strategies I've shared, one is being transparent, practicing shared leadership, delegate with purpose, communicating openly. And next is use collective resourcing. Please, let's not keep reinventing the wheel. So instead of expecting teachers to create everything from scratch, we need to share planning across departments, within departments, use existing schemes and adapt rather than build from zero. And I'm sure you've had this experience, those of you who are listening, that whether you're listening here, online, live, or you're listening later on, where you've got a new leadership team who've joined the school and they've come with new ideas. And rather than taking the time to see what exists and what works, they scratch everything. They scrap everything and decide we're going to build from the ground up again and we're going to build from zero. And then, of course, what happens is that, people are overworked and stressed and they have to take time off for what's happening these days. They leave the profession and they move on to something else. So use existing schemes and adapt, as I said before, rather than building from zero. Talking about resourcing, borrow resources from local schools or partner networks. And I've done that before. I've loaned other schools within a trust textbooks that we've already used and we wouldn't be using again until the next academic year because we've done that curriculum. And we shared the books. We loaned them the books and then we borrowed something back from them and so on. So, you have to look at what you have and build from that. Create a shared resource bank. And I think most departments do that. But also make sure that it's organized. Oh my goodness, I cannot stand a disorganized resource bank. And there's so many that you can choose from. But it has to be organized, honestly. I don't like going into any of these drives and systems and you see things all over the place and nothing is streamlined. So even that is important, that there's some order and structure there as well. So when you do these things, it reduces workload and frees the teachers to focus on teaching, not endless planning. And I remember being Key Stage 3 lead once, and this was one of my priorities, making sure that all the lessons were there for teachers as a starting point so that teachers would not be spending hours just building a lesson from scratch, but they had something to work with. And it was lovely to hear from colleagues that, that was so useful for them. And it did relieve some of the stress. They knew that the lessons were there and all they had to do was adapt according to the needs of their classes. And then that took about 10 minutes rather than an hour in an afternoon or late evening. So it's important that as leaders, we ensure that these things are in place to support our teachers. It's also important as leaders to model working smarter, not harder. And sometimes we do we do the opposite. We want people to see us working so hard and working extremely late rather than working smarter. And more often than not, the people that we lead, they do emulate us. And so it's important that we practice what we preach. So leaders can set the tone by curating the best tools and resources rather than overwhelming staff with new initiatives. And my issue with new initiatives is that we do not give them time to be embedded in practice. And as I said before, you start one initiative and before you could even implement, there's another initiative. So we try not to overwhelm staff with new initiatives. But streamlining reduces burnout and, of course, increases engagement. And ultimately, we need a mindset shift as well. Compliance says, do this task. Engagement says, you have ownership. Let's build something together. That is easy to do. Say, for instance, you want to introduce a new curriculum. Don't just turn up and go, right, here we go. This is the new curriculum. Now go through it and build lesson plans. No. We're reconsidering the curriculum. We're thinking of changing a few things around, but let's talk about it. Let's look at it together. Let's identify the positives or the pros and the cons, and then let's build this together. And then you'll have more ownership. So empowering teachers through delegation, transparency, and shared resources costs absolutely nothing. But what they do, they create a powerful return. All these things collectively create a powerful return: trust, motivation, and collective purpose. And I've been saying that throughout the entire show so far. So engagement doesn't grow from resources. Absolutely not. Engagement grows from feeling valued, seen, and trusted. The way we approach the resources will help to reduce the workload, and giving the teachers the opportunity to have more time to plan. But engagement doesn't grow from that. As I said, it's through feeling valued, seen, and trusted. So just some strategies that leaders could consider when thinking about teacher engagement. So how can leaders ensure professional learning is energizing and not just a checkbox exercise? And we've spoken at length about CPDs. So just to kind of sum that up, we want to make sure that CPDs are teacher driven and not leader imposed. So when teachers have a voice in deciding what they want to learn, they're more motivated and engaged. So as I said earlier on, offer choices, workshops, coaching, peer observations. And for me, one of the best things I've ever encountered as a CPD method in my career is action research. I love it. We do it at my current school, and it is so impactful. And that is where, you give teachers the option to choose a topic or an area that they think needs to be developed within the school, and go out and do an action research, do their study, their questionnaire, carry out their research, whichever way they want, gather with other like-minded professionals and discuss it, doing the literature review, and then coming up with their action plans based on their findings. So I think these are some of the things that we really should consider, because I think if we encourage teachers to research and to be solution-led, it will trickle down into other aspects of the school. And just imagine, you just have a school of teachers who are just so vibrant and energized and motivated, hopefully. But action research, if you're not doing that yet, do tap into it. Ask teachers what they need and design CPD around real problems of practice. Find out what the struggles are and plan accordingly. Align professional learning to classroom realities. So CPD is energizing when teachers can immediately apply it in their lessons. And, for me, it gives me a sense of pride when teachers say to me, "Oh, Michelle, thanks for that CPD. I'm now using it, and I'm using it repeatedly, not just as a one-off." And that's what you really want. And then, your teachers are really growing and developing as well. Link training to current student needs as well, and your curriculum priorities. So CPDs can't be nebulous and just things that you're plucking out of thin air, or because you listen to a podcast, for instance, or you read a book and you think, "Oh yeah, I'm going to share this with everybody." But how does it link with the current needs of the school, the students' needs and the curriculum priorities? Therefore, we need to avoid one-size-fits-all presentations with no practical application. We talk about teaching grandmas to suck eggs, and we do that way too often. We need to prioritize collaboration as well over passive listening. And if I could see you all online, and I would ask, put your hand up if you've ever been in a CPD session where you spent most of it doodling and just scribbling notes, not necessarily related to the session. And by the time you're done, I mean, I've done it before. I've been in CPDs where by the time the CPD is over, I've written a whole poem. I've drawn all sorts of images and scribbled all sorts of thoughts and start planning for the next day in my mind. So it's important that our CPDs are really engaging as well, and that they can be applied practically. So another thing as well is to prioritize collaboration, as I said, over passive listening. So that's what I'm discussing at the moment. And using coaching triads as well, lesson study, team teaching, and peer feedback. So important. We learn from each other best as well. When we get together as colleagues, I mean, it is so enriching and invigorating as well. It is important that we give teachers the time to do that. So we want to shift CPD from presentation mode to collaboration mode. Give people the time to get together and to discuss the common issues, the common problems. Members of my team this week said, it is such a great thing when we come together and we talk about our subject areas. Recently, we were discussing the use of symbols and motifs in one of the texts that we're studying. And the room just felt so vibrant. It was almost electrifying, having this discussion. We're talking about this particular topic with such passion, and everybody had a different perspective, and we all came together and shared that. It was great. It was only for a few minutes. It was spontaneous. It wasn't something planned. But if we get the time to do that, then clearly we're improving engagement and we're building that passion. We need to celebrate experimentation and progress as well. So when leaders encourage risk-taking and view mistakes as learning opportunities, teachers feel safe to innovate. So we need to recognize effort and growth, not just outcomes. Celebrate the milestones. Avoid over-monitoring or performative professionalism, grabbing the notebook and running around and checking on each class. When we do that, it has to be meaningful. It has to be intentional and should not be performative. You should not be doing it because you've got to check a box and by week 2, I need to do learning walks. But why am I doing it? Am I doing it because I'm checking to see how something that we've implemented is being embedded in practice? Am I doing it so that I can offer some more support for my colleagues? Or am I doing it because I want to be overly critical? So we need to think about that. We also need to close the loop, show that CPD leads to change. So professional learning loses energy when teachers feel it goes nowhere. And trust me, we've seen that. Implementation is lacking. We've got this massive launch. The vision is shared. We have the launch, but there's no follow-up. There's no follow-up in the implementation. We have no review. There's nobody reviewing it and having these discussions to see if this initiative is working or not. But it fizzles out and disappears along the way. So we have to try and avoid those things as well, because then we're not engaged in the next initiative. We're like, oh, yeah, here goes another one. So in closing the loop, we also need to follow up with coaching, share success stories across the department or school. For example, if you've tried something based on a CPD, whether it's something to do with AI or whatever it is, how is that going? Give teachers the opportunities to share and even do mini CPDs as well to show how this particular initiative has impacted their pedagogy and their development. Remove outdated initiatives that no longer add value. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to be reflective and go, right, this isn't working. Let's forget it. But we keep flogging a dead horse sometimes. So energizing CPD isn't about more training. And that's the mistake we make. It's about creating conditions where teachers feel empowered, supported, and inspired to grow. It's not, you need training in this and this and this. But how about developing this particular area that I'm probably struggling with or that I need some more support with? And we've got a comment here, which I'm going to share. It says, one thing SLT can stop doing today, reduce the number of assessments students sit simply to produce data. And you know what? I need to applaud that. it demotivates students, desensitizes students to healthy exam pressure, it reduces the curriculum and increases marking load. Completely agree. One assessment after another, just so that we can have some figures and some numbers. And you are right. It does all those things. It demotivates our students. Oh, another assessment. And also for the teachers as well. The marking load and what is it we're measuring if we keep assessing? When do we have time to check to see if students are making the improvements that they need to make? If we're constantly, or not just checking to see if they're making the improvement, but providing the opportunities for students to make those improvements. When do we dedicate time to that if the assessments are so frequent? And of course, it increases the marking load. And that's especially for us as English teachers. Verona, thanks for that comment. Especially for us as well, the marking load can become intense. I mean, even this term, I had to remove one of the assessments that was scheduled and put it for the next term because I recognized that the workload was intensifying and there was a lot of marking coming up as well. And talking about emotional intelligence without the teacher saying it, because, they just want to do it. Nobody wants to complain. I could tell that was going to add an additional burden. And so I think leaders will just have to devise strategies to acquire the data that they need without the frequent assessments, and demotivating our students in the process. So brilliant observation. Thank you so much for that. So apart from micromanaging, there's one other thing you could stop today. Reduce the number of assessments. Very, very important. And so tonight I've been talking about teacher engagement. What would happen if we prioritize that? What would happen if we put that first? And so we've explored a number of things, and we know that when we put teacher engagement first, that we will improve well-being, and we'll be able to do that in a sustainable way. So where is the line between supporting teachers and trying to so-called fix them? And we don't do that. So the line is drawn at intent and ownership. So therefore, supporting teachers means partnering with them to build on their strengths and professional goals. Fixing teachers implies the leader has identified a deficiency and is trying to change the teacher, often without their input or consent. So we're not trying to fix the teachers. We're not suggesting there's a deficiency. We're suggesting maybe that there are areas to develop and improve, and then we're providing the means to do that. So support is empowering. Fixing is controlling. And I don't know, a lot of times we tend to cross that mark and that line, and we end up fixing and therefore controlling. So what does support look like? Asking, what do you need to be successful? Providing resources, coaching, and time, as I've said before. Listening before directing. And listening not to respond, but listening actively, because sometimes we listen to respond, and whilst we're listening, we're formulating an answer rather than really listening between the lines. Co-constructing goals based on the teacher's strengths, context, and aspirations, recognizing progress and effort, not only outcomes. So this is what support looks like. Support assumes competence and aims to unlock potential. Support doesn't assume deficiency. But what does fixing look like? Telling the teacher what to do without discussion, overloading them with feedback or improvement plans, micromanaging or monitoring instead of trusting, viewing the teacher as a problem to be solved. So fixing assumes deficit and focuses on compliance, and that is what we should avoid. So a useful guiding question for leaders: am I doing this with the teacher or doing this to the teacher? If the teacher has voice, choice, shared ownership of the outcome, then the leader is supporting. But if the leader is prescribing, directing, controlling the process, then you're actually fixing. And that is just going to cause more problems and demotivate teachers. So as we close this conversation, I want to leave you with 3 quick takeaways. Teacher engagement is not a perk, it is a core driver of student success. When teachers feel valued, trusted, and supported, they bring energy, creativity, and excellence into the classroom. 2, leadership behaviors matter. Engagement grows where leaders build relationships, delegate with trust, and create the conditions for autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And 3, culture beats compliance. A culture of engagement doesn't happen through policies. It happens through people feeling seen, heard, and invested in. So now imagine this. 5 years from now, if we should engage our teachers, and if schools consistently place teacher engagement at the center of their leadership strategy, schools would look different. Teacher turnover would drop. Professional learning would be energizing rather than draining. Collaboration would be the norm, not the exception. Students would walk into classrooms filled with motivated, innovative teachers, not exhausted ones surviving the day. Schools would become places where everyone, staff and students, thrive. And if there's one leadership habit that can transform learning when teacher engagement comes first, it's this: lead with trust. Trust teachers with autonomy, trust their professional judgment, and trust their expertise, and they will exceed every expectation placed upon them. Because highly engaged teachers don't need to be pushed. They need learning forward with passion, purpose, and pride. Thank you all for joining me today. Let's build schools where engagement isn't just discussed, it's lived. So do take a moment to reflect. Think about teacher engagement. Where is it in terms of your priorities? And if it's way down on the bottom of your priority list, please, it needs to be at the top. Teacher engagement produces great outcomes. Thank you everyone for joining, wherever you're listening from. Thank you so much. Please do share this podcast to a leader, aspiring leader, whether senior leader or middle leader, so that they too can join in the discussion. They too can be self-reflective and, of course, continue to empower their teachers. Remember that when we build engagement, when we empower our teachers, student outcomes will naturally improve. Thank you everyone for listening, and do tune in for next episode.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.